The Christmas tree was 12 feet tall, imported from some specialty farm in Oregon, decorated with ornaments that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The Mitchell family estate was dressed to perfection. Garlands on every banister, a professional light display on the exterior, catering staff circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres like we were hosting a gala instead of a family dinner. This was how my father did everything: big, expensive, and impossible to ignore. I stood near the fireplace, nursing a scotch I didn't really want, watching my family perform their annual rituals. My brother Ryan was holding court near the bar, regaling cousins and uncles with stories about his latest expansion. Mitchell Motors was now the largest dealership network in the tri-state area, with 7 locations and plans for 3 more. My mother floated between guests, making sure everyone's glass was full and everyone's ego was appropriately stroked. And Dad was building toward something. I could see it in the way he kept glancing at me, the way he positioned himself at the center of the living room, the way he cleared his throat with theatrical significance. "I want to make a toast," he announced, raising his crystal tumbler. The room quieted immediately. Robert Mitchell Sr. commanded attention the way other men breathed, automatically, effortlessly, as if it were his birthright. "To family," he began. "To legacy. To the Mitchell name and everything it represents." He gestured toward Ryan with his glass. "To my son Ryan, who has taken the dealership I built and transformed it into an empire. 7 locations. 200 employees. The largest automotive business in the region." Applause rippled through the room. Ryan did his humble nod, the one he'd practiced in front of mirrors since he was 16. Then Dad's eyes found mine, and the warmth in his voice cooled by several degrees. "And then there's Marcus." He said my name like it tasted sour. "The family disappointment. Your brother built a business. You built nothing. 35 years old, and what do you have to show for it? Some consulting job you can't explain? An apartment instead of a house. No wife, no children, no legacy." The room went quiet, not the respectful quiet of before, but the uncomfortable silence of people witnessing something they weren't sure they should be seeing. Some of my relatives smirked. Others looked away. My mother took a sudden interest in adjusting a napkin on the catering table. Ryan raised his glass to me in a mock salute. "Don't worry, little brother. Not everyone can be successful." I took a sip of my scotch. Let the burn settle in my chest. "Understood," I said quietly. Then I pulled out my phone and texted Sandra Chin, my primary contact at First Continental Bank. "Withdraw the Mitchell Motors credit line guarantee. All $4.2 million. Effective immediately." Her reply came in under 30 seconds. "Confirmed. Guarantee withdrawn. Bank will notify borrower within the hour per standard protocol." I slipped my phone back into my pocket and watched my family continue their celebration. The gifts were piled under the tree. Expensive things in expensive wrapping, tokens of a wealth my father loved to display. Dad's phone started ringing before anyone touched the first present. He frowned at the screen. The number wasn't saved, but I knew who it was. The bank's emergency line only called for one reason. "I need to take this," he muttered, stepping into the hallway. His face was already troubled. Christmas Eve calls from unknown numbers were never good news in the business world. Through the frosted glass doors, I watched his expression shift from annoyance to confusion to something I'd never seen on my father's face before. Fear. I picked up a wrapped gift and shook it gently, pretending to guess its contents. It was going to be an interesting Christmas. I and the Mitchell family. There was only one acceptable path. The dealership. My grandfather started Mitchell Motors in 1962 with a single lot and a handful of used cars. My father expanded it to 3 locations by the time I was born. Ryan was groomed from childhood to take the wheel. Literally, he was driving demo models around the lot before he had a license. And everyone assumed I would follow in formation, a loyal lieutenant in the family empire. Everyone assumed wrong. I never fit the mold. Where Ryan was gregarious and charming, born with a handshake that made customers feel like old friends, I was quiet and analytical. Where he saw customers to schmooze and deals to close, I saw numbers to understand. Patterns in the sales data, inefficiencies in the inventory system, opportunities everyone else missed because they were too busy slapping backs and shaking hands. Where he dreamed of showrooms and sales records and his name on even bigger buildings, I dreamed of markets and capital flows and the invisible architecture of money that made everything else possible. "What's wrong with you?" my father asked when I was 14 and refused to spend another summer working the lot. This is your heritage. This is your future. Maybe I want a different future, I said. He looked at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. In a way I had. The concept of wanting something different from what the family provided was genuinely incomprehensible to Robert Mitchell Sr. So I became the disappointment. The one who went to business school for finance instead of marketing. The one who turned down a guaranteed position at the dealership to take an entry-level job at an investment bank. The one who chose the anonymous world of capital markets over the family name in 30-foot letters on buildings across the region. You'll be back, Dad said when I moved to Chicago after graduation. When that fancy banking job doesn't work out, you'll come crawling back to the dealership. I never went back. Not because the job didn't work out, it worked out spectacularly, but because I had no intention of spending my life in my father's shadow, being compared unfavorably to my brother at every turn, measuring my worth against a metric I'd never cared about. By 28 I was running the structured finance desk at Wellington Capital, overseeing $2 billion in transactions annually. By 30 I'd been recruited to Apex Banking Solutions as a managing director, specializing in commercial lending and credit guarantees, the invisible machinery that let businesses like my father's actually function. By 33 I'd saved enough to start my own private capital firm, Blackstone Ridge Partners, with $180 million under management and a client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies and a dozen regional enterprises that trusted me with their financial futures. That I never told my family any of this. Not a word. Why would I? They'd already decided who I was. The disappointment. The failure. The son who built nothing while his brother built an empire. Every holiday visit reinforced the narrative. Ryan's latest acquisition, Ryan's newest award, Ryan's expanding territory, and poor Marcus still figuring things out. I let them believe it. The less they expected of me, the more freedom I had to build something real. Something that had nothing to do with the Mitchell name or my father's approval. The irony of my relationship with Mitchell Motors was something I'd learned to appreciate in private moments of dark humor. 3 years ago the dealership hit a wall. Ryan's aggressive expansion, fueled by ego more than strategy, had stretched the company's credit to its limits. He wanted to acquire 2 more locations, but the banks were nervous. The automotive industry was unstable, interest rates were climbing, and Mitchell Motors' debt-to-equity ratio was already concerning. Dad called me that Thanksgiving. The first time he'd initiated a phone call in years. Marcus, I need a favor. No greeting, no small talk. Classic Robert Mitchell. You work in banking or something, right? We're having trouble securing a credit line. Our current bank is being difficult. Do you know anyone who might be able to help? I almost laughed. My father, who'd spent 20 years dismissing my career as playing with spreadsheets, was calling me for banking connections. I might know someone, I said. Let me look into it. What I didn't tell him was that I didn't just know someone, I was someone. Blackstone Ridge Partners had relationships with every major commercial lender in the Midwest. More importantly, I personally had the capital to guarantee exactly the kind of credit line Mitchell Motors needed. So I made a decision that, looking back, said more about my unresolved need for approval than about sound business judgment. I personally guaranteed a $4.2 million credit line for Mitchell Motors through First Continental Bank. The arrangement was structured through 3 layers of holding companies, making it impossible to trace back to me. As far as my family knew, some anonymous investor with deep pockets had seen potential in the dealership. The credit line allowed Ryan to complete his acquisitions. Mitchell Motors expanded from 5 locations to 7. My father gave interviews about his son's brilliant business acumen and the family's legacy of automotive excellence. Not once did anyone thank me. Not once did anyone acknowledge that the difficult bank situation had been resolved by the family disappointment. Why would they? They didn't know. And I told myself I didn't need them to know. I told myself I was helping because it was a good investment. Because the dealership would generate returns. Because business was business regardless of family dynamics. But the truth was simpler and sadder. I still wanted my father to be proud of me. Some stupid, childish part of me believed that if I helped enough, if I sacrificed enough, if I made their success possible, eventually they would see me differently. Eventually the disappointment would fade and they would look at me the way they looked at Ryan. With pride, with respect, with the simple acknowledgement that I mattered. 3 years and $4.2 million in guarantees later, my father stood in his Christmas-decorated mansion and called me the family disappointment in front of 40 relatives. He toasted Ryan's empire and dismissed my existence in the same breath, never knowing, never caring to know, that his empire was built on my foundation. Some lessons take longer to learn than others. Dad was on the phone for 20 minutes. Through the frosted glass of the study doors, we could all see him pacing, gesturing, his face cycling through shades of red I'd never witnessed before. Mom tried to keep the party going. Who wants to start opening gifts? But her voice was strained and everyone's attention kept drifting toward the study. Ryan had his phone out too, frowning at a series of notifications. What the hell is going on? I heard him mutter to his wife. The CFO is texting me about some credit issue. I sipped my scotch and said nothing. When Dad finally emerged from the study, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. His face was pale, his hands were trembling, and the commanding presence that usually filled every room had collapsed in on itself like a dying star. "Ryan," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk. Now." They disappeared into the study together. The rest of you stood among the untouched presents and listened to raised voices bleeding through the oak doors. "The entire credit line is being called. Can't just withdraw a guarantee without warning. $4.2 million, Ryan. We have 60 days to find replacement funding or the bank freezes our accounts." Aunt Patricia sidled up next to me. "What do you suppose that's about?" I shrugged. "Business stuff, I imagine. I wouldn't know anything about it." She gave me a strange look but didn't press further. After all, everyone knew Marcus was the disappointment. What could the failure son possibly know about business? The week after Christmas was chaos for Mitchell Motors. Without the $4.2 million credit guarantee, First Continental Bank was exercising its right to review the entire lending relationship. The dealership's operating line, the cash they used for daily expenses, inventory purchases and payroll, was suddenly under scrutiny. The expansion loans that had funded the 6th and 7th locations were being examined for potential acceleration clauses. Ryan called me on December 28th. The first time he'd called me directly in over a year. "Marcus, Dad said you helped us find that credit guarantee a few years back. Do you still have contacts at the bank? We need to understand what's happening." "I thought I built nothing," I said mildly. "Why would I have useful banking contacts?" "This isn't the time for." He stopped, took a breath. I could hear the stress in his voice, the unfamiliar sound of Ryan Mitchell not being in control. "Look, I'm sorry about what Dad said. You know how he gets. But this is serious. The business could be in real trouble." 60 days is a long time, I said. "I'm sure you'll figure it out." I hung up before he could respond. Dad called on New Year's Eve. I let it go to voicemail. "Marcus, this is your father. I don't know what's going on with the bank, but I need you to call whoever you know over there and fix this. The dealership, our family's legacy, is at stake. Call me back." No apology. No acknowledgement of what he'd said at Christmas. Just a command, delivered with the expectation that I would comply because I was his son and sons did what fathers told them. I saved the voicemail. Added it to a collection I'd been keeping for years. Evidence of a relationship built on one-way demands and conditional love. Mom called on January 3rd. Her voice was softer, more pleading. "Marcus, sweetheart, please call us back. Your father is very stressed. The business situation is complicated. Whatever you can do to help, we'd appreciate it. You've always been good with numbers. Maybe you could look at the books, find a solution." Good with numbers. The same skill set she dismissed as not practical when I chose finance over the dealership. The same aptitude she'd ignored every time Ryan's sales acumen was praised at family dinners. I deleted the voicemail without responding. 2 weeks passed. The calls kept coming, from Dad, from Mom, from Ryan, from family members I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone suddenly wanted to reconnect, to catch up, to understand what happened. I let every call go to voicemail and read every text with detached interest. The family that had dismissed me for decades was now desperate for my attention. There was a certain poetry in that. Dad showed up at my apartment on January 15th. He'd driven 4 hours from home, something he'd never done before. Never even visited my place in the entire 12 years I'd lived in Chicago. He looked terrible. Unshaven, exhausted, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt under a winter coat that hadn't been properly fastened. Robert Mitchell Sr. never looked anything less than perfectly put together. The man at my door was a stranger wearing my father's face. "Can I come in?" he asked as I stepped aside. He walked into my apartment and stopped in the foyer, looking around with unconcealed shock. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. The original artwork on the walls. Pieces I'd collected over years of traveling to auctions and galleries. The custom furniture, the chef's kitchen, the subtle indicators of wealth that I'd never bothered to flaunt. "This is..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Not what you expected from the family disappointment." He turned to face me. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in my father's eyes. He didn't know how to navigate a situation where he wasn't in control, where the script he'd written in his head wasn't matching reality. "We're losing everything," he said. "The bank is calling our loans. We have 45 days to find $4.2 million in new guarantees or they freeze our accounts. We can't make payroll. We can't buy inventory. Ryan is talking about bankruptcy." I gestured toward the living room. "Sit down, Dad. I think it's time we had an honest conversation." He sat on my leather sofa, looking small and lost among the expensive furnishings. I remained standing looking down at him for the first time in my life. "3 years ago you called me asking for help with a credit problem. Do you remember what you said? You work in banking or something, right? Like you weren't even sure what I did for a living." "I remember," he said quietly. "Do you know who guaranteed that $4.2 million credit line? Who put their personal capital on the line so Mitchell Motors could expand?" He shook his head slowly, but I could see understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. The pieces clicking into place. I walked to my home office and returned with a folder. Inside, the guarantee agreement with First Continental Bank, signed by Blackstone Ridge Partners LLC. The operating agreement for Blackstone Ridge showing me as founder and managing partner. 3 years of bank statements documenting the guarantee fees I'd paid to keep the credit line active. "I guaranteed it," I said. Me. The family disappointment. The son who built nothing. I put $4.2 million of my personal capital at risk so Ryan could buy 2 more dealerships and you could give interviews about the Mitchell family legacy. Dad's face went gray. He picked up the documents with trembling hands, scanning the pages as if hoping to find evidence that I was lying. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "You don't have this kind of money. You work some consulting job." "Blackstone Ridge Partners manages $180 million in assets," I said. "We specialize in structured finance, credit guarantees, and capital restructuring for mid-market businesses. Our client list includes 3 Fortune 500 companies. We generated $14 million in fee income last year alone." I let that sink in before continuing. "My personal net worth is approximately $23 million. I've built one of the most successful private capital firms in the Midwest while you were telling everyone I was a failure who couldn't match my brother's success." The documents slipped from his hands, scattering across the coffee table. "For 3 years I've quietly supported the family business. Paid guarantee fees totaling over $380,000. Put my reputation with the bank on the line for an operation I had no stake in. And every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every family gathering, you stood up and told everyone what a disappointment I was. How I built nothing. How Ryan was the success story and I was the cautionary tale." I sat down across from him, meeting his eyes directly. "You know what the worst part is? I let you humiliate me in front of the whole family because some pathetic part of me still wanted your approval. Still thought that if I helped enough, sacrificed enough, eventually you'd see me as more than a disappointment." Dad was crying. Actually crying. Tears running down his face, his shoulders shaking. I'd never seen my father cry. Not at his own mother's funeral. Not when Ryan got married. Not ever. "Marcus, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I interrupted. "You decided who I was when I was 14 years old and refused to work the lot. You wrote me off as a disappointment and never looked closely enough to see what I was actually building. Because that would have meant admitting you were wrong. And Robert Mitchell Sr. is never wrong. What do you want?" Dad asked finally, his voice broken. "To save the business. To fix this. What do I have to do?" "I want you to understand that my silent support is over," I said. "No more anonymous guarantees. No more hidden bailouts. If Mitchell Motors survives, It survives in the open with everyone knowing exactly who made it possible. Fine. Whatever you want. Just please. I'm not finished. I leaned forward. Here are my terms. A formal equity stake in Mitchell Motors, 25% of the business, proportional to my capital contribution. A seat on the board of directors. And a public announcement acknowledging my role as the primary capital partner. 25%? Marcus, the business has been in the family for 3 generations. Your grandfather started it with nothing. And it almost died because the family couldn't secure financing without my help, I interrupted. These are market rate terms for a capital injection of this size. Any institutional investor would demand the same. Actually, most would demand more given the risk profile. I'm offering you family terms while requiring you to acknowledge that I'm actually family. He was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with the implications. His precious legacy, the business his father had started, partially owned by the son he'd written off as worthless. There's one more thing, I continued. No more disappointment comments. No more comparisons to Ryan. At family gatherings, you treat me with the same respect you'd show any investor worth $23 million. Not as a failure son but as a business partner. And if I agree to all of this, then I reinstate the guarantee and we restructure the banking relationship on stronger terms. I know people at 3 different lenders who would compete for Mitchell Motors business. You'd end up with better rates than you have now. Dad stood slowly like a man twice his age. He walked to the window and stared out at the lake, his back to me. I've been a terrible father to you, he said quietly. Yes, I agreed. You have. I don't know how to fix that. You can start by signing the partnership agreement my lawyer will send over tomorrow. The rest will take time. I'll sign it. And Marcus, I'm sorry. For all of it. For every disappointment speech. For every time I compared you to Ryan. For every holiday where I made you feel invisible. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough for 35 years of being invisible, of being dismissed, of being the son who sat at the family table and felt like a stranger. But it was a start. The first real acknowledgement that I mattered. That I'd always mattered even when he couldn't see it. The announcement made the regional business news. Mitchell Motors announces strategic partnership with Blackstone Ridge Partners. The article detailed the capital restructuring, the new credit facilities I'd arranged through better lenders, and the 25% equity stake that made me the second largest shareholder in the family business. Ryan took it harder than Dad. He'd spent his entire life believing he was the successful one, the chosen heir, the son who mattered. Learning that his little brother had been silently propping up the business was a blow to his identity that he's still processing. I don't understand, he said at our first board meeting, looking at the financial reports I'd prepared. You could have done anything. You had the capital, the connections. Why did you help us? Because you're my family, I said simply. Even when you didn't deserve it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I've been a lousy brother. Yes. You have. I'd like to change that. If you'll let me. We're not best friends now. We may never be. But we're something we never were before. Honest with each other. Ryan actually calls to ask my advice now. About financing, about expansion strategy, about things he used to pretend he knew better than anyone. And I answer not because I need his approval anymore but because that's what partners do. Dad is different too. At Christmas this year, held at the same estate with the same 12-foot tree, he made a toast that almost made me spill my scotch. To my sons, he said, raising his glass. Both of them. Ryan, who built Mitchell Motors into an empire. And Marcus, who made sure that empire had the foundation to stand. I was too blind for too long to see what he was building. That's my shame to carry. But I see it now and I couldn't be prouder. The room was silent. Aunt Patricia looked like she might faint. My mother was crying into her napkin, the kind of crying that comes from decades of regret finally catching up. Ryan raised his glass to me in a salute. A real one this time, not mocking, not competitive, just an acknowledgement from one business partner to another. Me. I did something I'd never done at a family Christmas. I smiled. A real smile, not the polite mask I'd worn for 35 years. Because for the first time I wasn't performing. I was just there. Acknowledged. Part of the family in a way I'd never been before. Blackstone Ridge Partners continues to grow. We crossed $300 million in assets under management last quarter, and I've been invited to speak at 3 industry conferences about structured finance strategies. I've started mentoring young analysts who remind me of myself: quiet, overlooked, more interested in understanding systems than in playing politics. The ones who sit in the back of meetings and see everything while saying nothing. Never let them define you, I tell them. Build in silence. Let them underestimate you. The best opportunities come to people nobody sees as threats. And when the time comes, and it will come, make sure they understand exactly who built the foundation they're standing on. The lesson I learned from my father, the hard way, is this: some people will never see your value until it's taken away. They need to feel the absence before they can appreciate the presence. I was the family disappointment for 35 years. Now I'm the family's largest external investor, sitting on the board of the business that bears my name, watching my father learn to be proud of both his sons instead of just one. Sometimes, late at night, I think about what would have happened if Dad had never made that Christmas toast. If he'd simply ignored me as usual, instead of publicly declaring me the family disappointment. Would I have withdrawn the guarantee? Would I have ever told them the truth? I honestly don't know. Maybe I would have kept hiding forever, silently supporting a family that didn't see me, hoping for an approval that would never come. Maybe the disappointment speech was the best gift my father ever gave me, the final push I needed to stop being invisible. Was it worth $4.2 million and 3 decades of invisibility? Ask me at next year's Christmas dinner. I'll be sitting at the head table,